This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. Nanette Bartow here again with another episode of Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Last week, we ended just before talking about the infamous hood that the Zodiac wore at the Lake Berryessa murder. And we're going to hop back in with some laundry and research once again, of course, before going back into the hood. But we've got some interesting facts and evidence to put out here today, and I'm excited to share everything with you. So let's turn to that presentation and get started. All right, so dragging my feet begrudgingly, and as much as I don't want to have to read Gray Smith's books, simply because his number one suspect was Arthur Lee Allen. I did actually skip across a page that flipped open as the book fell in front of me the other day, and I came across this particular page in his book, which I thought was infuriating at best, but it did give us an actual third composite from Sonoma County, and in his book it says it's a commissioned Zodiac composite by Sonoma County Sheriff Don Stripicki, done in 1975. Now, I'm not exactly sure what witness he took this information from or how he obtained this particular composite, because the former Sonoma County composites that we saw actually did not show glasses, which I thought was odd. But maybe they did that composite minus the glasses in order to give a better view of the individual's face. And of course, there could have been this other alternative composite in which these glasses were presented on the composite. One of the things I want to point out in my research of this case is that Tom Voight and his crew came down pretty hard on Dennis, stating that this composite was not, in fact, an actual composite. And I questioned it for many years, obviously, until actually beginning to hear the audio files from the law enforcement agencies in which Dennis actually refers to that composite to one of the police officers who is in agreement with him. And then, of course, finding this in Gray Smith's book is kind of like a gold run, a home run. It's definitely golden. What infuriates me about it is that he's actually placed it right next to Arthur Lee Allen's 1967 and 1991 driver's license. And in what world? I mean, on what earth and what kind of people look at this page of Arthur Lee Allen next to this composite and say, oh my goodness, this is the same person? So it's almost as if to say they are choosing to turn a blind eye on purpose to fit the facts to their suspect. Or it's basically just they're telling America blatantly to their face, we're lying to you. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? Your eyes don't see differences. These two people are exactly the same, and continue to print books that America buys. Absolutely scary. Either way, I did actually have an opportunity to compare that composite with others we're going to look at. Once again, I know we keep rehashing this composite thing, but I think that it speaks volumes that every single composite that comes out is consistent with Jack Tarrance. The thing that this tells me here is it screams of cover up and conceal in order to facilitate an income off of the blatant lies that they are selling to America. So if you end up on a website that has Arthur Lee Allen's picture on it and it does not reference he was the number one suspect, but completely wrong and it is not him, get away from that website, because you can hardly trust that information. We are literally going to be looking at some of the information. You have to keep in mind that When the evidence is taken in these cases, not every aspect of the evidence is given to the public, and that is in order to make sure that a copycat doesn't pop up, repeat, or attempt to take credit for that crime. They keep and withhold certain amounts of information. So even in the FOIA files, I'm going to show you where that information has been misconstrued to some degree or not legitimately told completely true. Anyone who promotes the further agenda of any misinformation against Arthur Lee Allen should be looked at with a skeptical eye and not trusted. Tomboy and any other website that attempts to say this to us is literally lying to us. So basically, I put this composite now up here, and we can see how consistent the composite is with the original Sonoma County composite in 1975. And here is that version with the glasses. Again, not much of a difference between the two. They are extremely consistent with one another, with these long grooves right here next to the nose. The shape of the nose is very consistent. The shadowing underneath the bottom lip we can see is consistent as well. We can even still see some of those wrinkles that they attempted to put in the neck, showing the suspect's age. Either way, like I said, Tom Voigt tried to say that this composite was not real. I am finding now that there's plenty of evidence to show that, yes, this composite existed. This was the initial one, I believe, was done by Kathleen Johns, who gave descriptions after being abducted by the Zodiac and driven around for some amount of time, an hour, 2 hours, something to that degree. Again, you have to sift through this information to find out what the truth is and how long she actually spent with him, but it's neither here nor there. She gave an accurate description, and that description is fitting of Jack. So here I actually went back to find one of the pictures we talked about, because I had stated that Jack wore clear framed glasses. He also wore black framed glasses. And here we see the dark rim top glasses, because we can see where that rim ends right here on the side as the glass protrudes. I know it's a little complicated to see, but there is nothing actually obstructing the cheeks area of Jack with these glasses. So they are simply just top rimmed glasses, as is produced in this Sonoma County composite. And back onto the hood. So these are some of the earlier versions of what the hood was portrayed to look like, not this square paper sack version that we've been fed for quite some time. I think that's just another way to sensationalize something that isn't necessarily what it is. But if they want us to believe that this is the type of hood we're looking for, it would be interesting to note when they employed that particular version of it, just to see how it lines up to when Dennis found the hood and it was turned over. But this shows a police sketch artist made a portrait of the Zodiac from Brian Hartnell's description. Now, if we can see up here, this thing is not square topped like everybody is portraying in their Zodiac information. We see that it has these buckles or these wrinkles that occur, which would be consistent with a buckling that occurs when the material does not lay flat, because it was not sewn in a manner in which the head would actually fit perfectly. Again, too, I mean, even if that hood had been square on top, would it have laid as flat as they show? I don't believe so. You would have needed some type of a cardboard, some type of pedestal for that to sit the way that it was showing. Otherwise, that material would have to be so starched, or something would have to be done to it for it to hold that form. So when you look at the internet and you see these square box top hats that are being promoted as the Zodiac hood, think twice. I mean, a seamstress will tell you that material does not lay that way. And I had been presented with a picture of the hood, which indicated there was a small section sewn on the top of the hood that may have given it that four corner appearance, or the stitching of four corners that Brian Hartnell witnessed. And I, at the time when I saw it, didn't think much of it, because it wasn't really portraying anything interesting about the hood, and I dismissed it. I have not been able to relocate it, but I will find that photo, I promise you. And on to, let's just talk about some of the things that Brian Hartnell described in regards to the hood. Now, this is out of Graysmith's book on page 6. It said the man had circled him. Behind the tree, he had donned a ceremonial midnight black hood, square on top. Now, with 4 corners like a paper sack. Now, I want to tell people that there isn't 4 corners on a top of a paper sack. So some type of this information here is a little skewed, or the intended information that was being given didn't quite descript what it was that he meant to say. Either way, the bottom of a paper sack has a square 4-corner look to it. So why he didn't refer to the bottom of the sack versus the top of the sack, I'm not sure, but I think that's kind of a little bit, it might be information that they gave to deter us from figuring things out. But the hood hung down over the stocky man's shoulders almost to his waist and was sleeveless. Front and back panels came down over his chest. The top was flat with stitching around the edges. So the top was flat. Does that mean flat, just straight across? And stitching around the edges would certainly fit, and especially with what I stated in regards to how the material was laid, if there was not enough room for the width of the face, would cause that top to buckle as you slid that hood on. Emblazoned in white. Now, just keep in mind that we are seeing Graysmith's book in regards to the stitching and the zodiac symbol on the hood. And in when the hood was turned over to the FBI, it was determined it was a juke fabric that had predated the 1969 era of the Zodiac Killer, which means that it is authentic of its era. And the FBI told Dennis that the stitching was gold and not white as reported to the public. However, they did not find any DNA on the hood, they claimed. So let's hop back over now to Graysmith's book, because I think the information that Dennis had relayed to me from the FBI is consistent with what Graysmith is saying. However, he doesn't come right out and say that the stitch was golden. Listen to what he says. He says, the top was flat with stitching around the edges. Emblazoned in white on the bib-like front was a 3-inch square cross. So here we have another description that is not really fitting. A square cross placed over a circle. The ends of the cross protruded past the circle. It glowed with an orange tint from the setting sun and had been neatly, almost professionally applied. There were slits for his eyes and mouth cut into the cloth, and he wore a pair of clip-on sunglasses over them. So, interesting that in his portrayal of the information, or maybe these are actual statements that that Brian Hartnell made, which was that it appeared that it was orange, or gold could be an offset of orange. But I just thought that tinting reference to the color and it being something that the sun created, again, may or may not be the actual color of this actual stitching. And in fact, actually backs up what Dennis said about the FBI and the actual color of the cross circle. So we can see here in this particular document to the United States Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Dennis has turned over a knife, 3 rolls of film. It looks like Kodak 110 and 235 millimeter. I know that he gave half of the film in Jack's belonging to Stephen Dewhurst, who decided to keep it for himself rather than returning all of the negatives and pictures to Dennis. So we are still not sure what that man has. The FBI claimed from those rolls of films that they had produced family pictures, and some of those Dennis was able to see, but he did not recognize any of those people as family, so he's not exactly sure why those pictures were in Jack's belongings. Also, he turned over, it looks like a REGN 191 PA system with hood inside. And that is the hood that you are looking at right now. So this is the PA system that Jack had carried with him for most of Dennis's life. He was very particular about asking Dennis about this PA system from time to time and making sure that Dennis had it. Also wanted to make sure that if Dennis had to get rid of it, that he returned it to Jack. Jack said he was not to get rid of, sell, or do anything with that PA system. So what if he got got tired of it, he needed to give it back. That to me says that there's something extremely important, because this old piece of machinery isn't even something that Jack is using at that time. The PA system evidently is for music. I was under the impression he had been using it for ham radio, and maybe he still could have. I don't know enough about the systems that are used in those to make that prediction, but clearly Jack was not making use of this particular item, but he did not want to see it go away. So, like the top of a paper sack, flat. So I look at this hood being held in Dennis's hands, and we see that it is flat across the top. And obviously without any, I'm going to call it gussets or area to actually widen the face part, the whole top of that flat part would then actually buckle and not be the straight flat top like we're seeing over here. Now, these people had to, obviously, they take a look at this. They had to put some type of a brace or something to firm up and keep that particular hood straight, flat, and above the top of the head, as is seen in this picture. So there is something inside of this hood that is creating or helping that to stand up and appear like a square paper sack. And again, it looks like the bottom of the paper sack, not the top of the paper sack. Now, let's see, okay, I've already talked about that. It said he had 4 corners at the top, like the top of a paper sack, black. It came down with the front panel about to here, and a kind of thing that came over the shoulders, and then the same thing down the back, straight down. And in the front, he had a circle with a symmetrical cross in the middle. You know what I mean by a symmetrical cross. So while he does state that it had 4 corners at the top, like the top of a paper sack, again, that would indicate that that was open on top, and we can see that that clearly is not. So some information is being lost there, or the description. We also have to remember that these descriptions were given relatively soon after the attack, and not always is a victim the greatest eyewitness that there is, due to either shock or fear, anything that might be going on during the commission of that crime. So back to the hood, I just wanted to point some of the things out based on the hood that was found in the PA system, that if we take a look at the original composite that was drawn of the version that Brian Hartnell spoke about, we see that this one is very like in makeup, and we can see that it is cut off with no arms. So let's see here. He said the hood hung down over the stocky man's shoulders, just like we see here. This would also do the same, to his waist, and was sleeveless. And if you look at this from about where the head would probably sit in this particular hood, there is plenty enough material for that to actually hang down to about the waist. And we'll look at a better picture of it here in a second. Emblazoned in on bib-like was a 3-inch square cross placed over a circle. The ends of the cross protrude past the circle. So here we see that the ends protrude past the cross of the circle. Again, consistent. It glowed with an orange tip from the setting sun. Well, this actual stitching is gold, as we have discussed. Gold, yellow, gold in color. Slits for his eyes. We can see that there are actually slits for the eyes. And a pair of clip-on sunglasses over them, which means that the glasses would have had to have an area for the clip-ons to adhere to, and which means additional holes. And we can see the additional hole very clearly here. This one over here is a little bit harder to tell, but clearly there is a hole so that those clip-on glasses could attach to the glasses seen beneath the hood. Let's see here. Looks like the characteristics of the hood and how it compares to the one Dennis found in the Jack's PA system. So we are looking at a hood that is very similar to what was represented by Brian Hartnell. He did indicate, so let's see how this hood checks off. Here's another version of the hood. Now we can see how big it is and how long it is in comparison to Dennis's body. So you can see that it is there's a very good possibility that this would hang all the way down, as Brian Hartnell had indicated. So he indicates their eye holes. Yes, we have eye holes in this one. Holes for clip-on glasses to connect to the eyeglasses. Yes. Gold-colored stitching. Yes, white was reported to the public, and that way if somebody showed up with a hood with a white stitching on it, they knew that that person was a copycat or attempting to take credit for something they didn't do. And yes, people do this. I can't explain why, but many, many people do. The mouth hole is present. It is shown here in Stephen Dewhurst's book. It is very small, but it is still existent. There are no sleeves. We can see that there are no sleeves on this. It is bib-like. Yes, it is bib-like. It hangs down in the front and it hangs down on the rear like a bib. Square like a paper sack. Yes, if a paper sack was folded and laid down, it would be square as a paper sack. It is black, and that is true. The fabric predates the Zodiac murder at Lake Berryessa. Yes. And the size of the crosshair, 3 to 4 inches. Now, in what we're reading now in Grace Smith's book indicates 3 inches. I know, well, when I look at this particular emblem on this hood, it does appear to be much larger. It appears to be somewhere between 5 and 6 inches. But I have also seen additional reports by Brian Hartnell, and we'll talk about those when we get to the Lake Berryessa case, where it indicates that it was 4 or 5 inches. So it is likely that it is larger, and the representation of 3 inches, again, is a piece of misleading information to throw off copycats. Now, let's talk about Brian Hartnell's description to Grace Smith in regards to the suspect as it compares to Jack. So it said the man's dark sleeves were clamped tight about his wrists. His trousers were tucked above half boots. Evidently, Zodiac was wearing blousing rubbers used by the military for trousers tucked into boots. On his left side was a bayonet-type knife, at least a foot long, in a sheath attached to his belt. Now, the things I have to say about this. The bayonet type knife I have a perception of a bayonet type knife, and it belongs on the front end of a gun from World War I, World War II. It has a very visible bloodletting groove down the center of it and is typically double-edged. This is so that it is a premium killing machine. The groove that goes down the center actually allows for blood to escape because, well, not many of us are going to have an opportunity to stab somebody, but it is not an easy task to do with a flat blade. And in many cases, depending on the size of the blade, that hole can close up and the person could actually live because they don't suffer a severe loss of blood. Whereas with the bayonet and the groove down the center, it actually gives an open space for the blood to flow freely out, which would then help to exsanguinate the person and finish off the job that you started, which your attempt was to kill them. My reason for bringing this up is we're going to see different versions of this knife as Brian Hartnell tells it. And one of the knives that he describes to me, and we'll talk about it when we get there, is very consistent with the knife that was reported by one of the witnesses in the Nikki Benedict case, which we talked about, I want to say, in the 1960s somewhere. We'll find it when we get there. Anyways, Brian Hartnell mentions several lengths of common variety white hollow core plastic clothesline hung beneath the man's jacket. Now, we have talked already about several cases in which this white hollow core or white line is used to tie people up. It is pre-cut. We have information in Stephen Dewhurst's book that indicates that Charles, Jack's youngest son, was very aware that Jack kept and carried in the rear or in the trunk of his car several lengths of pre-cut white cord, which is definitely just a consistency. And trust me, Charles never thought his father was the Zodiac. He didn't even want to believe it when I was working with Dennis. So for him to make that statement or reference is not only out of character, but very consistent with what we know about these cases. And as we go along, we're going to start to see more of this white cord that is being used. Brian saw what he thought was the man's stomach hanging over his trousers. However, the stocky man's weight seemed solid, not flabby. So let's take a look here at Jack's picture. This is 1971. This is almost 2 years later. However, This belly didn't pop up overnight, and it is very solid. My father had one of these bellies, and I kind of just attributed it to the congestive heart failure that he was suffering from, and in which case we know that Jack ultimately ended up with as well himself. But that's several, well, not even several years. I want to say by 1996, he's at least diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and this is approximately 1971. But what we're looking at is that very solid, hard belly where it is not flabby. It is definitely protruding and round and solid and almost muscular like, where the fat is on the inside versus on the outside. The man's right hand was held outstretched towards the pair as he walked. In it, he carried a blue steel semi-automatic pistol. Now, I went two ways when I saw this information because we had just recently discussed whether or not I believe Jack was left or right-handed based on where his gun was positioned, his cigarette was held, and how he leaned on a couch and which hand he used to dominantly deal cards. If those pictures were flip-flopped, as we've seen in some of Jack's pictures, then that would indicate he was left-handed. If those pictures were not flip-flopped, then he was right-handed, and I ultimately came to the conclusion of left. Now, not that this statement leads me in either direction, because I am predominantly left-handed, but I am a right-handed shooter when it comes to guns. I have only recently, within the last year, discovered that I can actually shoot really well with my dominant hand. And now, obviously, that's the testing that they do for concealed weapons. So you have to be able to use both your dominant and non-dominant hand and control your weapon, of course. So is there an opportunity that Jack, being a left-hander, was taught to shoot right-handed, and that's why he carried the gun right-handed? Also, the effect that he was said to be ambidextrous, and we see him writing some of the letters with his non-dominant hand. So I am still now up in the air as to which hand Jack might be, because it didn't solidify it for me, but I thought maybe it pointed to it. And then I looked at myself and realized that I can't even guarantee that he was right-handed simply because he held the gun with his right hand. Let's see. The stalking man stood towering over the couple on the blanket. I talked to him, said Brian. It was a remarkably calm voice that came from beneath the hood, a voice that was not high or low pitched, a monotone. The speaker sounded to Brian to be between 20 and 35 years old. Now, I am not going to allude to the sound of somebody's voice and how age plays into that. I mean, unless somebody is really aged and their voice is really crackly, I don't really think that I attempt to gauge age over the telephone, and I speak to a lot of people on a consistent basis. But again, this also might be information that is thrown in there to throw us off, because we know all other accounts of the Zodiac were between 35 and 45 years of age. That voice, it was like a student's, he told me later, but kind of a drawl, not a Southern drawl though. So a drawl, I don't know of any other drawl other than a Southern drawl. So this is definitely a cultural type of way of speaking based on the location that you come from. Jack being from Texas, so I can see how they carry out those words with this very long enunciations. And he was very calm, cool, and collected. Anybody who could commit a murder right in the middle of the streets in a busy town like San Francisco and simply walk away not sweating or even alluding to the police that they should be looking at him is a very calm, cool, collected person. We also had heard that he spoke with this drawl as well from the police department at Lake Berryessa, the 911 operator that took in the call. And of course, her story has changed over time. So while she initially claimed there was a drawl, she then later took that back. I just don't know what to believe anymore when we are looking at some of the information and why people tended to change their stories over time. He says, "I want your money and your car keys," said the man. "It's just a robbery," thought Brian. The man in the hood continued speaking. The words were even and soft spoken. "He didn't seem well educated, but not illiterate," Brian said later. He said, "I want your car to go to Mexico," continued the stranger. I about fell over when I saw this, guys, because we have already made the claim that Mexico is one of the ploys that this suspect uses in almost every single crime that we've seen so far, from lipstick to Black Dahlia to the communications that continue thereafter, communications written to Bill Hirons. It is not a coincidence that this individual continues to refer to Mexico, which happens to be the absconding place for all of your CIA, your mob, anybody who might be under indictment. If Cuba wasn't open for them to go to, then Mexico was the next favorite place. There is talk about this ranch that is in Mexico just beneath El Paso, where CIA actually will go to hide out, and the mob would go to hide out when under indictment. So it is a very real thing, and I think that Jack is aware of this, and most likely because he is part of that system. He says, Brian looked up at the black cloth hood with the clip-on dark sunglasses covering the eye holes. Beneath the slits of the hood, he did catch the metallic glint of yet another pair of glasses. As a question, it's stated, but Brian could see dark brown, sweaty hair through the slits as well. So if we look up here now, Jack is donning brown hair. And we know that it was reddish brown as described in the San Francisco composite. And that can take on different colors, obviously, at different times of the day, whether the sun is out or not. So here it does definitely look brown. Now, some of the research that I found also indicated that the Navy attire that the Zodiac wore was an older generation Navy attire, older than 1969. And this would be consistent with the Navy attire that Jack would probably still have and own, which is previous to the time frame and probably more circa 1946 to 1955. That's some research I would like to figure out. What was it about it that made them think that it was old, and what generation did they believe that it came from? But either way, we know that Jack had access, having been in the Navy during those time frames, to that type of apparel, and was likely wearing that during the commission of his crimes. Circa 2002 in connection, we've talked a little bit about Harry Phillips and the 20 and 20. I believe he said they covered the costs of doing it, and I was actually able to find articles that did indicate that 20 on 20 was the ones that paid for it. And there were 8 suspects tested in total. I was upset, I believe, in the past, when after speaking to Harry Phillips, he indicated that they didn't test Jack because they knew he wasn't the Zodiac. And I thought that to mean that they weren't willing to actually investigate it themselves. But since they are not the investigative body, I've kind of taken a step back and kind of rationalized the statement. And weren't the Zodiac, could possibly have meant that during this time, Jack was an open investigation, and still is an open investigation with the FBI in regards to the Zodiac. And it had not been concluded whether or not he was the Zodiac yet. And they did not want to step on anybody's toes by running DNA. Though I thought that that would be the perfect opportunity, since all of these entities are crying, we don't have resources, we don't have money. This case has exhausted all of the funds that we've ever had, and we don't intend on throwing any more at it. Well, you had 20 on 20 here ready to do the work for you. In a lot of cases that I work, if there is criminal acts occurring, I ask them to refer my report to the DA or to the Department of Justice, because a lot of times they don't have the resources. Local law enforcement agencies don't have the resources to chase around these little cases or these real estate fraud cases. And if they take my report into them, that resource has already been handled for them, and they are more likely to get the attention from the police department in regards to the opinion letter. So here you are with a company that is willing to do the DNA testing, which is expensive, and they don't do jack. Still, I have a problem with it. But here's one of the statements that I see that was written by a Zoe, it looks like, of the Examiner staff. So it says, all indicators point to Arthur Lee Allen as the infamous Zodiac Killer. I laugh. Ha ha. Who murdered the people in the Bay Area in the late 1960s and bragged about it in letters to the Examiner and Chronicle. Armed with DNA evidence from San Francisco Police Department's DNA crime lab, investigators may be on the verge of proving it. Saliva unwittingly left on the envelopes of those letters may provide the missing piece to a puzzle case that has befuddled investigators for more than 3 decades. Shortly after San Francisco police inspectors Michael Maloney and Kelly Carroll were assigned to the Zodiac Killer case, August 29th, 2000, they sent several of the white envelopes to the DNA lab for the analysis. One suspect's DNA also was sent to the same lab. Now, here we have Kelly Carroll and Michael Maloney in possession of letters. So we know that these letters existed in 2000. Where did they go from there? Though police were tight-lipped on whose DNA was sent, Vallejo Police Lieutenant Joanne West, acting spokeswoman for the Intercity Zodiac Task Force formed in 1998 by police agencies in San Francisco, Vallejo, Napa, and Solano counties, confirmed that police have DNA samples taken from Allen. So it's likely that that's one of the DNA samples that was sent in. Arthur Lee Allen is a primary suspect in the case, but that's all he is, said West in a telephone interview Thursday. She would not say if police have DNA samples from other suspects. Now, I don't know if they keep leading with the Arthur Lee Allen thing because they're so darn embarrassed they made so many mistakes in blaming this guy and chasing their tails after this guy that they just couldn't see straight, or they just wanted to really disbelieve the composites that were being taken by police and by victims of the case. But to continue to instill this idea that Arthur Lee Allen is a prime suspect for this is absolutely ridiculous. Because the case has garnered so much public attention and launched 1,000 theories, San Francisco police are proceeding with caution. They are not releasing any names. If we point the finger at one suspect and it isn't him, that could be used in a case against a second suspect, Maloney said. Still, tidbits of the information have come to light. While refusing to reveal the name of the principal suspect, he said that he's been a suspect for a long time. People have talked about his name. Allen, a former Vallejo school teacher, long has been considered by investigators to be the most promising suspect. Again, I don't know what in this man's life made these people think that he had anything to do with the Zodiac case or was even capable of doing it. But he died in 1992, apparently taking his secrets with him. Those secrets may soon be revealed by the San Francisco Police Department's crime lab. If Allen's DNA matches that from the envelopes, the lab may be credited with solving one of the most, and it cut off. I don't have the rest of that article, but here's the Examiner still feeding to America at this point that Arthur Lee Allen is a good suspect. We do see that the Zodiac, some of the links that I was able to find in 2002, San Francisco police obtained another partial genetic profile from another suspected Zodiac communication, and that DNA did not match Allen's DNA. Several years later, Vallejo police submitted evidence to a lab for testing, including 2 envelopes, which means several years later. So if in 2002 they had envelopes and several years later Vallejo's sent envelopes, we still have valid letters out there, original documents that can be used for this examination. Vallejo police submitted evidence to a lab for testing, including 2 envelopes, which contained some of the first letters sent by the killer in July of 1969. Now, who owns 20 on 20 and who would have yet better opportunity, for concealing information to maintain the mystery so that there can be money made continuously from this? Well, 20 on 20 TV show is actually owned by Walt Disney and ABC. And of course, Walt Disney is the maker of a version of Alice in Wonderland in 1951. And we do note that in a lot of the communications, there's reference to time and white rabbits and these simple things that are found within the Alice in Wonderland story. So there's been some heavy relation or correlation to Alice in Wonderland as I've researched over the years, people talking about it and what related to it. I don't usually like to go off on those tangents or the Zodiac astrology tangent. All of these are meant to lead you into a different direction rather than trying to figure out the case. So it's just busy work, as Jack would say. Then we see a Zodiac DNA update on December 20th of 2021. The profile belonged to an individual who could not have been the Zodiac killer. So now I'm not sure what they have tested if they're trying to come back and claim that the original DNA that was completed was not the Zodiac Killer, so it doesn't mean that Arthur Lee Allen was ruled out. I really don't know where they're going with this, or an knowing contributor not involved with the crime. A major complication is during the Zodiac era, a popular form of civil disobedience was to reuse stamps. Now, I'm not sure how you could reuse stamps because we are actually seeing many of the cancellation stamps that have occurred on all of the Zodiac's communications. And maybe this is why they started using cancellation stamps in order to prevent people from reusing stamps. But we do know that they're using them. So how is it possible that somebody could reuse a stamp that already has a cancellation postmark across it? I'm not sure, but that's something that could be figured out. Currently publicly known status is the Zodiac DNA. This is in December 2021. 2002 DNA sample. The sample was taken from Zodiac correspondence as part of an ABC television show and allegedly ruled out no, it did, not allegedly. It ruled out Arthur Lee Allen as a suspect. Subsequently, Tom Voigt revealed via his source, a retired SFPD inspector, that the sample was collected from the outside of a stamp and thus is quite possibly not Zodiac's DNA profile. That's hilarious because in the previous information, we heard that the DNA was taken from under the lip of the envelope and underneath the stamp. So here is Tom Voigt out here spreading more lies, disseminating more truth, and trying to lead us to believe that there's a possibility that Arthur Lee Allen could still be the Zodiac. Don't buy it, America. Another one said Zodiac DNA update, December 20th, 2021. The testing of Zodiac evidence produced a DNA profile. That's the good news. The bad news, the profile belonged to an individual who could not have been the Zodiac Killer. That's as specific as I can be. One possibility is the profile belongs to an accomplice. Now, we're in kind of play, and I'm not sure what profile they ended up with and why this profile could not be found in any other system. But there are ways that we can still obtain DNA in regards to this case by living relatives to make that determination. I liked what Dennis had wrote in his opening of his book, which was Zodiac, who was this monster, and what was his motive. After more than 30 years, the Zodiac mystery has become an obsession for people all over the world. The mystery only seems to grow with time. Several motion pictures have been based on the Zodiac. The 1971 movie Dirty Harry, as well as The Exorcist 3 and the Limbic region. The one question that is most puzzling of all is what happened to the Zodiac? After several years of communicating with Bay Area newspapers, his communication suddenly stopped in 1974. Now, of course, Dennis wrote this before he realized that there was a 1986 letter in the possession of Tarrance Pascal, one of the original document examiners in the case. So, of course, that obviously will change because it was true at the point that he believed. We did think that the Zodiac fell off the face of the earth on 1974, but that's because they stopped telling the public what was going on. And he was never heard from again. Was he dead? Did he suddenly feel like he was going to get caught and stop? Or was he living next door to you? I thought that was a very compelling opening, and the fact that these movies are being made after the Zodiac really kind of instills the media's perpetuation of the mystery and the money-making idea behind these type of crimes and stories. We are actually going to enter in. It looks like I've got just enough time for the full audio from Chris Hopkins with the FBI. This is 6 months after DNA was turned over to the SFPD by the FBI. So let's go ahead and play that audio.
Hi, Chris. Dennis Coffin here.
Hey, Dennis.
How you doing?
That was a funny message.
I don't know why I popped off in that, but
I got a laugh out of it. I appreciate it.
oh, that's cool. I was hoping you like it.
Yeah.
I know if you figured you didn't like it, you'd be mad at me.
No, I thought it was funny. So, how you doing?
Oh, man, I just turning gray-headed.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's all.
I know Ken told you. I was pretty disappointed by the whole thing. You know, it's just only because I know we'll get to the right answer. It's just that we had our hopes that, you know, by now we would know.
Right.
So it's just, you know, a timing thing, and that's, you know, I know you share the frustration too, so.
Oh, yeah. I just, you know, I don't know. I talked to Kelly Carroll today just to, I don't even know why I called him, because I had talked to him originally before I even went in there, but, he wanted me to send him the stuff in the mail at first, and, Andy probably wasn't that interested.
Right.
And that's why I went to you guys. You guys are the ones that listen to me.
Right.
And,
well, how was he? Was he receptive?
Oh, yeah, he was very anxious to talk to me now. A lot more than he was at first, of course.
Yeah. Did you tell him that you talked to us and...
Well, he mentioned you guys' name, but I didn't tell him a whole lot because I don't want to cause anything between you.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yeah, I just, if anything, I was, whatever, I hope you guys are working together on this, get this thing done,
Right.
And, I'm looking at it like this guy's a murderer, and he's just out there, and, I don't know. I just want the thing to be over with.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So how'd you leave it with Kelly?
Well, yeah, I talked to Ken a while ago. I didn't want to, seem like I was going around you guys' back to talk to him.
No, that's all right, man.
But he wanted to get together next week, and I said, okay, well, I have to talk to you guys first. And I talked to Ken, and he said he didn't have no problem with it.
Yeah.
So I left a message after I talked to Ken and said, I guess we could meet next week, for him to call me. He hasn't called me yet, because it was after 5 when I left a message, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it was left at.
Okay. Well, yeah, I won't be able to be there. I'm going to be out of town next week.
Oh, yeah?
That doesn't matter. I mean, if you and Kelly and Ken can all meet.
Yeah, okay.
I don't bring much to the table other than an ugly mug. So.
No, I know. But I just, I just sitting here and I had to do something. I don't know.
You know what? I don't blame you. And I'm glad you did. Because now, maybe we can get things, he and I had total miscommunication.
Yeah.
And I'm going to leave it at that. I think he made misrepresentations. He led me to believe he was going to get right on it to include your envelope.
I see.
And when I finally got through to him, he says no. And so, whatever. If that's what he wants to say now, that's fine. And
right.
I'm, screw it. It's not worth it,
Right, I understand.
But if he now is willing to meet you and, look at all the information you have, that's what we want.
Right.
We want him to get excited about it as we are.
You guys just want to get solved just like I do.
Right. So if that's what it takes, that's fine. He has this feeling that we're trying to steal something from. We gave him your name. We gave him your stepdad's name.
Yeah, I know you did because he said that.
And we gave him everything. We didn't give him. Well, you brought us because I sent him down an introductory letter.
Right. Yeah, he said that. He confirmed that. Yeah.
So if this is what it takes, that's fine. We have no heartburn over it.
Right. Yeah. I know, I know you've been totally honest with me. You've been very helpful, man. I appreciate it. I feel very comfortable about you.
Oh, well, that's good. Yeah.
And I do.
I wish Kelly had the same feeling.
Yeah.
But,
well, maybe by talking to him, we can all work this thing out and get this thing done, man.
Right.
That's great.
Absolutely.
And, because this thing's been dragging on for 6 months. It seems like 6 years to me, but it's been a long time.
Right.
So if I make some progress, that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
And, he's got the ticket down there for his end of it. Now, he likes to bolster, he was giving me this line of shit about, well, it's going to be a local prosecution and, it's his thing. And I said, well, I didn't get into it with him, but the fact of the matter is he only has one homicide in his jurisdiction.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
The other one, there's more jurisdictions that have more into it than he does.
Sure.
And matter of fact, we do, we are sanctioned by the legislature to work serial murder cases.
Right.
So, I wasn't going to get into a pissy match over turf or jurisdiction. All I want is him to do the DNA.
Yeah, just get the job done. Yeah.
Right. And what, it kind of annoyed me, as I told him initially, our laboratory was committed to a 30-day turnaround time.
Right.
So we would have been so much further ahead than where we are now.
Absolutely.
But, everyone, because it's such a high-profile deal, everyone wants to be the one, to say, I was the one who solved this,
Right. And
this was my case, and da-da-da.
Right. And, and I don't think they're also saying that, hey, everybody worked together to solve it, and everybody's,
That's right.
What's wrong with that?
And these, you run into this every now and then with these petty cops.
I'm sure you do.
The real person is you.
Right.
So there wasn't anything that Kelly Keller did to identify this guy as the Zodiac. It was because brought it in here.
Right.
So there's really, that's what Ken and I always are laughing about.
Oh,
There's only one guy got credit for this.
That's true. Thanks.
So the fact that, he's not necessarily a sworn police officer at the time, there's only one guy that solved it.
Wow.
Now, the other guys who just happened to be cops at the time and the place
Right.
that he came to. But
Right.
there's one guy who gets the credit. And so Kelly can jump up and down all he wants. When the story, is told.
Wow.
Well, he was just sitting on the desk at the time when the phone rang. So.
Right. Well, that's cool. Appreciate it. So you feel that way,
Yeah.
But, yeah, totally. So, well, I'll meet with him and see if we can.
Okay, well, that's pretty much the end of the presentation. Next week, we are going to follow up with the additional audio files from law enforcement and how Dennis was treated by these different agencies, who was working with Dennis and who was actually trying to stop the progress of this solve. So everybody have a wonderful weekend. Take care, and we'll see you next Friday. Oh,